Warning. DisAllusioned Podcast covers distressing themes such as coercive control, domestic violence, sexual assault, suicide, abuse, and human trafficking. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DisAllusioned Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Sherwood, and today we have a very special guest, Melody, who is the co-host of Cultimatum Podcast. How's it going,
Ari?
Melody?
How are you? Good. I'm doing really good. I'm excited to be here and share my story with you.
So do you want to start from the beginning?
Yes, I ended up as a member of a cult called the House of Yahweh, based out of Abilene, Texas, when I was about 15 years old. My dad found the cult, and we joined as a family. So it was myself, my mom, my dad, and my sister, the four of us. And I was about 15 at that time. The quick version of kind of how that played out for me was I joined at 15. I was engaged to the leader's son by the time I was 16. I was married to him by the time I was 18, pregnant also when I was 18, and had my first baby just after turning 19. Now, I will say that actually, the reason I didn't get married before I was 18 is because my dad was very insistent that I got my diploma before I got married, which not everyone in the House of Yahweh had that luxury, but my dad was a little bit strict and said, I want you to finish high school first. So that worked out good for me. That worked out good for me later on. At the time, I was mad because I was 16 and I knew everything, right?
Right.
It was a doomsday cult. The leader's name was Israel Hawkins. He did die in 2021 sometime. He was, I think, 87 years old when he passed away. And I was a member for about 5 years. I'll go backwards just a little bit and say that, they did not believe in hospitals or medical care outside of like home remedies and midwives for bearing children. So I had my baby a home birth, and there were actually 4 midwives at my birth because it happened to that I went into labor during a feast, which is the gatherings. They would have gatherings 3 times a year. It was a lot like, in that aspect, it pulled a lot of the Jewish beliefs into it. So we kept the feast of Passover or unleavened bread, Pentecost, and Tabernacles were the feasts that we kept, which even though we lived in Michigan, we traveled 3 times a year to go down for these feasts. But obviously when I got married, I moved down there and I lived down there. I was the only one in my family who ever lived down there. And I lived down there the last 2 years that I was a member.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Basically, the leader, they started teaching multiple marriage when I was pregnant, pretty late into my pregnancy. I think that sermon came out in the August before my son was born, that October. So
They didn't do that beforehand?
there were rumors that this new teaching was going to come out, but it didn't officially come over the pulpit until that August. So I was like 8 months pregnant, which, you're already having self-esteem issues when you're pregnant like that. You gain weight and you're uncomfortable, and then your husband to hear, oh, you can pick another wife, that's not a good time for your self-esteem. To hear that that teaching, it was devastating to me at that point in time. Luckily, at that time he did not ever take a second wife, and we ended up leaving together. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was,
really?
yes, because basically the reason they started this teaching is because my father-in-law, who was the leader, got caught cheating on my mother-in-law. And instead of, apologizing or saying, with his secretary, he said, I haven't sinned. I've done nothing wrong. She's just another wife. It's very biblical.
Right.
It's in the Old Testament, and I've done nothing wrong. Or she's a concubine. I mean, he went with both, whatever was convenient for at the time. She was either another wife or a concubine. So either way, it basically absolved him of any wrongdoing. And my mother-in-law was devastated. She ended up serving him with the divorce papers and leaving him. And subsequently, my husband, myself, my sister-in-law, which was her daughter, and her husband, we all got excommunicated at the same time because we were supporting her, basically. We kind of took her side in things. And
Right.
and we wouldn't conform to the teaching, and we were out, especially I was pretty outspoken about it. I was just like, at first I was torn because of the brainwashing. I was like, do I have to accept this, and trying to make myself kind of accept it? But every time I would try to make myself accept it, there was just a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that said, this is wrong and I can't do this. I just knew that, like, I am way too jealous a person. I won't be able to be a multiple wife. And basically that was what I kind of ended up telling my husband at the time. Like, I'm like, just so you know, if you think you're going to have more than one wife, I'm not going to be one of them, because I'm out of here.
Right.
And we left that would have been in 94 when we ended up moving back to Michigan. And that was actually, we originally were going to stay down there, but I had a friend who was also pretty outspoken, but she lived in a trailer on the compound property, and she wouldn't keep her mouth shut either. And she was trying to sell her trailer, but she couldn't. Nobody wanted to buy a trailer on the property of a cult, right? And so they didn't want to offer her a fair price, and they wanted to get rid of her. So they ended up burning her trailer down. Now, it was supposedly an accidental fire.
What?
I don't believe that for 1 minute. And her little dog, her little dog was in there. It was so sad. And I went and helped her,
Her dog was in the trailer?
Her dog was in the trailer. Yes. As a matter of fact, when I went to help her, like, salvage what she could out of the trailer. And you could see, because of the smoke damage, you could see where her little dog had laid and died, because it was the only spot on the carpet that didn't have smoke damage. It was like an outline of his little body. It was so sad. And that's when I was like, okay. I went home and I told my husband, I'm like, your dad is capable of some really scary stuff. And to the point where I can't stay here anymore. I got to go. So I'm going back to Michigan. Eric and I are both going back to Michigan, that's my son. And I was like, and I am not, I'm not staying here, and you're welcome to come with us, but I'm not going. I'm not staying. I just didn't feel safe anymore. And, I struggled with that transition after leaving. It took me years to even call it a cult. It took me years to I would say I probably didn't call it a cult for at least, I'm gonna guesstimate between 5 and 8 years, but I know I didn't, at least 5 years. I didn't. That wouldn't even come up. Those words wouldn't have even come out of my mouth, because I didn't process it that way. I hadn't gotten that far in my deconstruction to be able to look back and say, oh yes, that was definitely a cult, until I really started. But I did create that Facebook support group for just ex-members of my own cult. And that was because I was looking for support, looking for answers. And I thought, well, who better is going to understand what I've been through than other people who've been through it? And I felt like I would get support that way. And I would say I certainly did. And I felt like, but then I felt like I wasn't doing quite enough. And in 2020, that's when I started the Cult Escape and Recovery group on Facebook, which, just broadened it to anybody who'd been through a cult experience, which I learned so much more through doing that, because I realized, oh my gosh, there's so many similarities in these cults and the way that these leaders do the things that they do. And I'm just like, I was blown away, because I just thought that I had been through a more unique experience. And I'm like, oh, this isn't unique. That lots of people have been through this, and through very similar tactics, and you think you're alone when you first come out. You really do. You think nobody else is going to understand this. You feel very isolated.
Once I found those groups on Facebook, I was mind blown by all of the survivors on there who I could relate. Didn't matter what group it was.
Yep. Yep.
could relate to everyone in some way.
Yep.
And it's definitely mind-blowing when you realize the scale that it's at. Like, how many people are out there who could relate
Yes.
to you?
Exactly. And then it does make you wonder, like, what is going on with these cult leaders? Do they all receive the same playbook? Are they, are they part of their own little cult where they learn how to be cult leaders? I mean, some of those similarities, you're just like, wow, this is bizarre. How do they all use these same tactics? It's like they are part of the same club. And
Yeah, it's very universal.
It is. It is. And you don't think that when you come out. You don't think that at all. You think that you've been through something pretty unique, which in some ways, I mean, for somebody who hasn't been in a cult, it is unique. But when you start talking to people that have been through a similar experience, you're like, wow, a lot of people have dealt with this and have had to deconstruct from this. I remember
and even people leaving relationships.
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. Andrew and I talk about that a lot on the Cultimatum podcast because that was where he originally started his podcast. And I have told him, like, sometimes being in a bad relationship is kind of like being in a cult of one. If somebody is controlling you, manipulating you, gaslighting you, it has very similar effect on your emotions, your brain, your development, all of those things, your emotions, when you come out of it, I think you react in a similar way for sure.
Yeah, the tactics are all pretty much the same.
They are. They do tend to kind of run along a very similar pathway or however you want to word that. But I remember I can remember the first triggering thing for me coming out and readjusting was after I'd gotten my first job and I was scheduled to work on a Saturday, which we believed was the Sabbath and that you would go to hell if you worked on Saturday. And I was scheduled to work on a Saturday and I had an all-out panic attack. Just started hyperventilating, crying, panic attack. I was like, I can't do this. I called in and quit. I'd only been working for less than a week and I had to call in and quit. And I'm like, I can't function. I can't do this. And I'm like, just take me off the schedule. And yeah, I wasn't emotionally prepared.
The fear?
It
was. Fear of like society and being in the world?
I don't think it was the fear of the world as much as it was I was convinced I was going to go to hell if I worked on Saturday because of the brainwashing. Okay. I really believe that. Yeah. To the point where I was like, that's when I started having those doubts. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I should go back because it would ease this anxiety. But then there was that part of me was like, I can't go back. For one thing, I was excommunicated. I would have really had to suck some toes to go back. And I don't think I was willing to do that.
Learning to adjust to the world. And then, like you have to work on Saturdays sometimes and having that experience where you're challenging your programming.
Exactly. That's what it was. And really what I figured out with a lot of those things was, and some things took longer than others. Like it took me 17 years before I put a Christmas tree in my house because they taught that Christmas was pagan. And so I just didn't do it. And, my now husband, who is not the same man, he was very patient with me. And he was kind of like, whatever you're comfortable with, we'll work at your pace and I'm good with that. His big thing was just, he did not want to take away his parents' ability to have Christmas with our children, which I thought that was a fair compromise. I was like, okay, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
We'll celebrate Christmas at your parents' house. But we just didn't put a tree in our house for many years. So that was, and now I kind of go overboard because I'm making up for lost time, but that's what I say all the time. I go all out for Christmas now because I just think it's pretty and fun. And I'm like, well, I didn't do it for 17 years. So now I go a little bit overboard.
Right. What shifted things for you where you were able to finally celebrate and put the tree up?
Oh, that is kind of a funny and a little bit of a long story, but I actually did it very, very slowly. Like, I had seen these trees at Sam's Club that were like outdoor trees with like fake snow on them, but they didn't have, and they didn't have like the branches. They looked like trees with no branches with snow on them with like the LED lights at the end. And they were really pretty. And I'm like, that it isn't really a Christmas tree. It's kind of just this decoration. And so I justified it in my mind. And I'm like, and I'm not going to hang any ornaments on it. And so I bought those and I put those in my house. And then the next year I was like, well, maybe I can put some ornaments on them. I hung some ornaments on them, and I just slowly eased myself into it to where and then I'm just like, well, see, nothing's happening. The world's not imploding. I'm not dying. I'm not getting cancer. Horrible things aren't happening to me. And I, till the point where I was like, then I wanted to get a full blown tree and put the lights and the ornaments, and I wanted to do the real deal. But I did it pretty slowly. I don't know that anything in particular shifted. I just slowly changed my thinking about it. Which that I mean, I don't know that I think most people because I've talked to other people who've left from my cult, and some people like put a Christmas tree in their house like right away the year after they left. And I don't know if I just the brainwashing was more imprinted on me and it took me longer to deconstruct that. But it's deconstruction after that kind of experience is really, really unique. And that's why some of those questions are really hard to answer. Like, where should I be in my healing? Well, there is no fast and clear answer on that for somebody, right? Because we all have to do that at our own pace. It's a lot like grieving. Like, you can't tell somebody how to grieve because that's a really personal thing for each one of us. It depends on our personalities. It depends on our connection with that person. It depends on our environment and the kind of support we get. It's very similar to that, I would say, like the grieving process. And for some people, they grieve for years, right? And some people, they grieve for a year and they're like, okay, I feel I moved on now. And, you might always miss the person, but some people just get through that process way faster than others.
Yeah.
The other question I always find difficult to answer in the group is people that come in and they themselves aren't in a cult and they have a family member that's in a cult and they want to know, how do I get my family member out of this cult? And that's another one to where you're just like, oh, there is no clear answer other than you can't, there's nothing you can do or say that's going to change it. You can be there. You can be supportive. Yes. You can be careful not to call it a cult. Be careful the words you choose. Be careful about keeping that door of communication open as much as you can or are able to, depending on the restrictions of the particular group. But you kind of just have to maybe encourage critical thinking and wait for that person to have their moment where they start questioning it and they start waking up from it. But there's not like, I mean, I wish there was. Wouldn't it be nice if there was this magic word you could say and the person would just be like, oh my gosh, you're right, I'm in a cult and I'm going to leave. I mean, that would be amazing if it was that easy. But you and I both know from being in that situation that your whole way of thinking changes. Your whole lifestyle changes. Everything about you becomes wrapped up in that group. It becomes part of who you are. And in order to leave it, you have to change who you are. You are forever changed by that experience.
And you really have to figure it out on your own.
You do.
And your family and friends are really going to have to walk that tightrope.
Yes.
If they want to maintain any sort of relationship with you. Otherwise, it's like, it's so easy to have a family or friend excommunicated.
Yes. And especially if you're
Yeah.
talking about somebody who's still in it. Even with somebody who's come out, you're going to have a little bit easier time, but somebody who's definitely still in the depths or in the mix of it, it's going to be really difficult to get through to them because like there is no magic word. And there's a lot of secrecy. I mean, I know there was with my cult, and I didn't even remember this. My aunt reminded me of this years later. She said, "Do you remember when you tried to start telling me some things about the House of Yahweh that one time?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "And it was you and your sister together." And your sister was like, Mel, stop. We're not supposed to tell all that stuff." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And then I just clammed up, and my aunt was like, and then I knew something was not right with where you were. I knew that the group you were in, there was something weird if you weren't allowed to tell me. I mean, I was only 15, and this is an aunt I was very close to. And all of a sudden I was keeping things from her, and, almost to the point where I had forgotten, obviously, to keep these secrets. But my sister reminded me very quickly that, no, you can't say anything. And I immediately just, got back in line. "Oh, yeah, you're right. I can't say anything." And I quit telling whatever it was I was going to tell, because I don't even remember it. But my aunt remembers it very distinctly.
Right.
So that brainwashing can go pretty deep. And it does affect your relationships with people outside of the group, obviously, because you're not telling them everything that's going on, because you're conditioned not to.
Oh, absolutely.
And if they knew, they would think you were crazy. And to some degree,
and you do know that.
Yeah, but you also, in your mind, think it's not crazy, and I'm doing these things for very particular reasons, and this is part of what I believe, and you really do believe it when you're doing it. You're doing it because you believe it to be the right thing to do in that moment. I did. So I left in 94. I did attempt to get some
How old were
counseling.
you?
I was 20 when I left.
Okay.
And I did
Nice.
attempt to get some counseling, but it was somebody who had absolutely no experience, knew nothing about cults. And I went to one session and was like, this person has no idea what I'm talking about, and I don't think going there is going to be helpful. And
that is a huge problem for cult survivors, is finding a therapist who understands this kind of psychology.
Oh, for sure.
And cult recovery.
Absolutely. I think it's much
there's so many things in your recovery.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably easier now than it was when I got out, because there was no internet when I got out. I mean, even if I had known that there was, some therapist that specialized in cult survivors, they probably would have been 5 hours or 6 hours away from me. And, who's going to drive 6 hours for therapy once a week? So, but nowadays we have the internet, and we have the ability to have a virtual counseling session, which is, I think, an amazing thing that can be really helpful for cult survivors and people coming out now, is that they can find that help, because they aren't just looking in their own city. They can look, not just countrywide, but they could get somebody in another country potentially that could meet up with them online. Which is an amazing resource.
They have access to more resources.
Yes. And then the groups too, the same thing. Like, even just getting that online help by joining a Facebook group or something wasn't an option in, 95. That wasn't a thing. The internet was just barely coming out, and I think maybe only available in universities or something. I did end up going through a divorce in 1996. And I'll just touch on this a bit and say that I think that I don't really blame anyone for my divorce other than the cult itself, because when you're in a cult, you really are a cult version of yourself. And when you get married in a cult to another member, they're a cult version of themselves. And neither one of you know who you are or who the other person is until you leave. And then you've got to figure that out. on your own. And sometimes you figure out you're just not compatible. And you're like, the only thing we had in common was this cult. We got married because we thought we believed the same things. And now neither one of us kind of know what we believe. And we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And having to find your own identities at that point forward.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That is hard enough to do on your own, let alone to try to do that with a partner that you're not even sure that you're compatible with. And then if you figure out that you're not, I can tell you that a lot of us got married young when we left the House of Yahweh. And last I knew, there was only one couple of all of us that left that was still married. And honestly, I'm not even 100% sure they're still married. They just were the last I knew, which was 4 years ago. They may not even be together anymore.
Okay.
I don't know. But I just think that it's pretty common when you get married under those circumstances that the odds, and we were all getting married so young. We were all teenagers. So we were
Right.
all under 20 getting married. And I think that puts your odds of your marriage lasting, that puts your odds and your percentages down in a really low bracket that you're going to last.
Yeah.
Because we all know those statistics, right? The younger you get married, the more, and I think it just has to do with maturity and knowing who you are. Of course, you think you know who you are when you're
Yes.
16, 17, 18, but you don't.
You change so much throughout your whole life. And when you're like even 20 years old, you don't know yet.
No, you
Yeah,
don't
that's
know
like
what
the
you don't know.
beginning of your life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But you think at 20, you're like, I'm so smart. I'm so smart. You think you know everything. I think really about in the early 20s is when I started figuring out I don't know as much as I thought I knew. And I remember coming to
Right.
that realization of like, oh gosh, and I really, especially having left the cult and realizing that really I was questioning everything I believed in during that period in my life, to the point where I was like, I really stepped back in conversations and held back from having really strong opinions, because I'm like, I might be wrong about this. And because I've been wrong before when I really, really thought I was right. And I really thought I knew the answers. And, I remember being in high school and getting in religious debates with some of my friends and classmates about what I believed, and just really thinking that I was right, and saying what I said very adamant, whatever it was I believed very adamantly, and then getting out and being like, gosh, I was kind of a jerk. I was just like, I was a know-it-all. I thought I knew everything and was like treating them as if they were stupid, when really in reality I figured out, oh, Mel, you were the one that was kind of stupid. You didn't know what you were talking about, but you thought you did.
Right. And you were programmed to believe
Yes.
this is the true way and the only way.
Yes.
It's amazing how many this is the only way there are. Like, there's so many groups where this is the only way.
Yep.
And this is the truest religion, the truest beliefs. And you believe that, and you're convinced of that.
I think that's how they keep members, is you have to believe that you're there for a reason. And if the reason is because we're right and everybody else is wrong, then you're not going to leave, right? Because there is no other right answer. So you have to be there. You have to stay in whatever that group is, or whatever that. And I think that's why I really shy away from organized religion now. I still have an amount of spiritual beliefs, but I don't believe in organized religion, because I feel like I feel like I've been there, done that. And I tried going to some organized religions or churches when I first came out. And I certainly know that I went in the door with my walls up. I had my walls up because I was like, I've been there, and my first thing was, don't tell me what to do, don't tell me what to believe, and don't ask me for my money. And the minute they tried to do any of those things, I was like, nope, I'm leaving. Bye. I'm done. And so most of them I would go
Exactly.
like one time and I'd be like, no, not for me. Until I just finally was like, I just figured out that I don't think that I'm going to be comfortable in an organized religion based on my past experience. And I'm not saying that it's wrong for everyone. I just don't think it's right for me because of my personal experience.
Right. And that's important to know. And that's your part of
Yeah.
figuring out your identity is like, what do
Oh,
I
for
believe
sure.
in? And deciding you don't believe in organized religion.
Yep.
Like, that's who you are, it's part of who you
Exactly.
are. And that's totally okay. 'Cause,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
finding your spirituality after leaving a cult is a very tough experience.
Oh, it
That
is.
is a huge struggle. Being spiritual or finding your, a religion or,
Yeah.
you're believing in anything. I think that's something that is a huge challenge. Because once you start believing in something, you'll start like questioning right away, like, wait,
Exactly. Do I
because
really
of your
believe
past
this?
experience.
Exactly. Then
Yeah.
you start to
Which is not a bad practice.
It's not. But then you start to like critically think about it, and then you start to chip away at what you're thinking, and you're like, do I really believe this? Do I not? Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. I'm actually surprised when some of the people that I that were in the same cult as me, I'm more surprised of the people that come out and end up in an organized religion than I am of the ones who end up being agnostic or atheist. I'm like, that the ones that end up in organized religion, I'm like, oh, I don't know that. I mean, to each their own. And I'm, like I said, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with organized religion. I just think it's wrong for me. But I can't relate to people that have been in my position and then end up in an organized religion. Because I can't. I'm like, aren't they scared? Like, aren't they scared they're being bamboozled again? Like, because that's my big thing is I was like, I'm never going to let this happen to me again. I'm not going to be tricked again. Because I felt like, I learned enough from that I'm just going to stay away from that as much as possible.
Makes sense. But you were brought into it by family.
I was, but I did certainly grasp onto the beliefs fairly quickly, maybe because of my age, maybe because I was so young. I grasped onto it pretty quickly. And, obviously to get married and move down there, I was, maybe, and certainly in that aspect, I was more involved than even my family that brought me there, because none of them ever lived there. None of them ever moved down there. They still lived in Michigan, and they would only travel to the feast three times a year that was required for the 2 years that I was there. But they did leave at the same time that I left. We all left at the same time. After I was excommunicated, they're like, well,
so your whole family left?
We all left at the same time. Yep. Once they found out I was excommunicated, they were like, well, good, because we weren't going to go back anyway. And I'm like, well, I guess that worked out. Because they were upset about the multiple marriage teaching too. They didn't agree with the multiple marriage teaching either. So, there was
it's so interesting. How old is this cult? Because to like add that kind of teaching,
it's actually
suddenly
not very old. He started it in the 1980s. I want to say maybe 84, 1984-ish, maybe 86, somewhere in there. And I know he started with a small trailer. He actually kind of emulated his brother, had another House of Yahweh that was in Odessa, Texas. And I think he kind of stole his brother's idea and then created his own House of Yahweh in Abilene, Texas, and then claimed that the two of them, him and his brother, were the two witnesses spoken of in Revelations. Because this was a doomsday cult, and they spoke that was a lot of our focus was on storing food and preparing for the future and preparing for the tribulations that were coming because of Revelations. And with that, I mean, in hindsight, I think a lot of that, because I hear of a lot of cults that do this and use this tactic, I think that focusing on that fear really keeps you very focused and busy, and it doesn't leave you a lot of time to think critically about what you're doing and why. You are like just kind of moving forward with horse blinders on, like very focused. Gotta do this, gotta prepare for the future. And we called it the work of Yahweh, and we were always involved in doing and focused on the work of Yahweh, which, we didn't get paid a whole lot for doing it. We got, and they didn't even really call it pay. They called it a blessing. And that was their way, that really you were a volunteer who received a blessing. You weren't really an employee. So they didn't have to, pay you minimum wage. I mean, my husband and I together, we both worked 40 hours weeks, and we together got one paycheck, and it was $120. And for years, I had thought we both made $60 a week. And I was later told that no, men made $80 a week and women made $40 a week. And that was his paycheck was double what mine was. And I'm like, what? I was making $1 an hour. And I'm like, that's insane. Even for back then, it was insane, because this was in the, early to mid 90s. And I'm like, yeah, that's crazy to think about. I don't even know how we made it. I do think
very oppressive.
Yes. They certainly were about enriching themselves. And he was so controlling. My father-in-law was so controlling that at one point, my husband and I think we saw a sign by the road that one of the farms down the road was looking for somebody to help clean their horse stalls, like 3 days a week. And we went down and we talked to them, and they were going to pay us. It was like $40 a week or something, maybe, to clean out the stalls. And so we took this extra job. And when my father-in-law found out, he docked our pay by the $40 of what we were making at this farm, because he did not want us to have any other source of income, and said, well, you'll get your full paycheck if you quit your other job. And we're like, so basically we were
literal
doing
slave
more
labor
work for less money. Yes, exactly. So it didn't make any sense for us to keep doing it. And we were like, well, I guess we have to quit doing this, because if we don't, then we're not going to, we're doing more work for less money, or for the same amount of money. And another way he was really controlling with our finances, he lived on the same property as us, and he could see our house across the field. And, we're married, we're adults, right? And if our lights were on past 10 p.m., we got docked. Our paycheck was docked by $10 every night that he saw our lights. He kept track of it. And our paycheck would get docked $10 for every night we were up past 10 p.m. So we controlled our bedtime. And we were like married adults. It was weird.
They're using money.
Oh, yeah. And exactly.
Control every aspect of your life.
Absolutely.
Right. So they had a real interesting technique here. So they were using fear of the doomsday, and then your pay.
Yes. And the money.
To control you guys.
Yes. It was a
Which
combination.
Is very typical.
Oh, for sure. I hear other people's stories now, and I'm like, yep, sounds familiar. So many similarities that it's, like I said, it's just crazy when you talk to other people, your mind is blown by how much similarities there are in the way these groups or these leaders tend to control the people that they surround themselves with. And that's why I think they have a tendency to want to, and once you're awake, I call it awake, and you realize that you're in a cult, they really want to get rid of you quickly, because they're worried that you're going to influence or possibly open the eyes of other members, or other people are going to wake up too. And they quickly want to push you out the door once they realize it. Because I remember when I finally realized that this was all a bunch of BS, but I was still going to the services. I remember actually looking around in the audience, like, is anybody else hearing this? Is anybody else thinking this is bullcrap yet? And like looking for somebody else to just like not like to just see their face being like, what? Or, you know, looking for a facial expression that told me they woke up too. Like, oh, they're not believing this either. And you're scared to actually say that out loud because there's this tattletale mentality too, that if you tell the wrong person, they're going to go straight to the leader and tell them that she's saying this and she's doing this. And then the next thing you know, you're drug in the office and you're getting the 3rd degree and you're getting lectured on, why are you saying this? Why are you doing this? And they try to get you back under control immediately. So you've got to do it really discreetly to try to find out if anybody else is waking up or not believing anymore. And you're kind of scared to do it because you know you're going to get punished or you're going to get caught if you talk to the wrong person. But I think that culture too is by design. I think that is by design so that you aren't talking or really sharing what your critical thoughts are with each other while you're in that group.
Absolutely, because you don't know who you can trust. And I think they set it up so the tattletale method works very well because it like encourages the members to seek your grace as the leader. Or, to seek your approval. Like, oh, we're coming to you and we're loyal to you because we're going to tell you when other people aren't. And there's this whole dynamic going on between the members.
Exactly. And even though those people are your family essentially when you're there and your friends, there's also this underlying distrust that you all have for each other at the same time. It's crazy. And I think that is by design so that you won't share your thoughts, your especially critical thinking thoughts. They don't want you to share those thoughts with other people because that might get somebody else to start thinking more critically and being like, wow, what they said really kind of makes sense.
Exactly. And critical thinking is like their enemy.
For sure.
Worst nightmare.
For sure. It is.
To start thinking or to ask questions.
Exactly. Yes. Because I remember specifically getting in trouble for asking a question. And my question was pretty legitimate. It was one night, my husband still wasn't home. It was 8:00 at night. So I called my mother-in-law and I'm like, hey, do you know why he's not home yet? And she's like, well, I will make some phone calls and see what I can find out. And she made some phone calls and she called me back and she's like, yeah, I don't know exactly when he's going to be home, but it's going to be later. I'm like, okay, well, thank you. And I'm like, and then I got pulled in the office and shamed and ridiculed the next day to say that as a woman, I had no right to ask a question about when my husband was going to be home and that that was not my place and I was not staying in my place as a woman to ask that question. And I'm like, that seems like a pretty simple question. Like, I think asking when your husband's going to be home does not seem out of line, but I was put in my place. That was out of line, which is,
right. Like, how dare you, woman, when it's your right as his wife. No,
exactly. I'm like, I'm not saying that he has to be home right now. I'm just asking, when is he going to be home? Because it just was unusual that he was gone that late.
Right. But, so you're not allowed to ask those kinds of questions as a woman.
Right. Yes, exactly.
You just have to let him do what he does.
Yep.
Right.
Precisely.
So you are still in contact with people who have left the group.
I'm in contact with quite a few. Actually, there is a possibility there may be a documentary coming out, and I helped to recruit ex-members to do a big, like a sample interview for that. So we're really hoping that will go somewhere, and that there will be.
Wow, that's awesome.
Hopefully soon. That's our hope. Because for all of us that were there, we feel like, in comparison, obviously you were in a very small cult in comparison, but ours doesn't get a lot of recognition either. So we're like, why is our story never told? Why are we never on a documentary? Because, you see the documentaries about the bigger cults and the bigger groups like the Lulus de Mundo and Jehovah's Witnesses, and those groups certainly get a lot more attention documentary wise. There are some smaller ones that do, but not as much. It's not as noticeable.
There are some, right, and that is too bad because there are so many little cults all like just everywhere. Really, it's like the big ones, okay, everyone knows, but what about the awareness on the small groups that, they do grow, though, over time if they get out of hand,
Yeah, exactly. I think most of them do start out as, small groups of like maybe just somebody's immediate family, and they start inviting people in slowly, and they grow at a slower pace. Because really even I'm sure that the ones that started in the 1800s probably started out with maybe 20 to 30 members, and then now there's thousands of members because once you have children and you're grown into it. I think that's why we were encouraged to have children, because they felt like, well, if we're brainwashing them right from the beginning, they're going to be really good followers, and they're going to be really conditioned to believe this because they've been here since birth and they know nothing else. So they feel like and
they'll keep that alive.
Yes, exactly. And they feel like those are the ones that will carry the going. Yep. Exactly.
Right? A lot of the leaders, when they die, their children take over.
Yes, exactly. And, who knows? I know that right now, the House of Yahweh, after our leader died, that there's now a board of elders that is in charge. And I guess it's like 12 of them or something. But he has, who knows? I know that last I knew he had between 60 and 100 wives and concubines together. So who knows how many children he had before he died. I mean, because the last number I had heard was 30, which I thought was high. And then a friend of mine that left about 10 or 12 years after me, and her and I were talking. I said, well, last I heard, Israel had like 30 wives, and she kind of laughed. And I immediately thought, oh, well, that's an exaggeration, right? And she goes, oh, it's at least between 60 and 100. She goes, but it's really hard to tell because the only way is that they sit up in front of they get the front seats of the sanctuary, but it's not super obvious where the line stops of that's them and then regular parishioners. You can't really tell. But she said it's more between 60 and 100. And I thought, wow, and I thought 30 was probably an exaggeration. That's insane. So,
I'm like, no, it's twice as much.
Yeah, exactly. At least twice as much, maybe more.
Yeah. Like I see that your new teachings are really working out for you.
Exactly. For you, not sure about everybody else. And of course that led to a lot of underage girls being married off to a lot of older men. And
I can imagine.
That's the result of that teaching, is that, and I just cringe at the thought of that, some young girl early in her life, 14, 15, 16, and being married off to some 60-year-old man who already has 18 wives or something. You just think, wow, that's awful. It's awful to think about.
It's trafficking. And it's also legal in the United States with the parents' permission.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
In some states, they could be 15 years old. And if the parents give them permission, they can be married off.
Yeah. Isn't that scary?
What 15-year-old is mature enough to make that kind of decision?
Oh, exactly. Even if they think they are, they're not. We know they're not.
And the laws allow... There's this loophole in these laws that allow these practices to take place.
Oh, for sure. And that's another way that he stole from the Mormon teaching. That was his bit of Mormonism in his teaching, is that once he started the multiple marriage teaching, then all of the members were then, and this is after I had left, but all of the members were then told they had to all legally change their name to Hawkins. which is exactly what Joseph Smith did in the Mormon Church. And that was because of multiple marriage being illegal. But if the government comes in or the authorities come in, it's very difficult by name to see who is married to who, whose children are whose. So it makes the process of trying to go in and legally sort this out. You would have to do genetic testing in order to know who these children really belong to, because everybody's name is Hawkins. So now you can't tell who's who. And that was his way of hiding a lot of the polygamy that was going on, was for everybody to change their name to Hawkins. And then shortly after that, they started the slavery teaching, to where they all had to lean up against a doorpost and have an awl put in their ear to dedicate themselves as slaves to the leader. And that was also a teaching that happened after I left.
So they are slaves.
Yes,
and they know they're slaves.
Yes, they've acknowledged that, and they think it's an honor. They look at it as an honor. They're taught to believe it's an honor. Yes, exactly. To be a slave to the leader,
to strive to be their slave.
Yes, isn't that insane?
Yeah,
it really be telling you you're a slave outright, not even like underlying, not even hiding it with another word or another term, to just be telling you you're my slave, and they're accepting of it. It's crazy. But that's how deep the brainwashing can be.
Dehumanizing you.
Exactly.
Right.
And at that point, you're so brainwashed, you don't even quite realize that you're accepting something that seems so unacceptable.
I don't know. You think and you think that's your free will, like choosing to be a slave.
Exactly.
It's so interesting.
It is. And to think that, almost be honored to do it. Like, oh, I want to be part of this ceremony and do this to prove my loyalty to the leader. And it's just crazy that seems like something that you would feel honored to do, when really it seems like something that somebody would have to force somebody to participate in.
Oh, absolutely.
And I guess I'll kind of move on from there, kind of going into more of my healing process, and where I feel like, for me personally, really a lot of my healing does come from trying to support others, giving others a platform to speak their truth, tell their stories. And I think, for one thing, that there's so much secrecy in these groups, and a lot of us hold our tongues for years. We hold our secrets for a long time. And when you're really ready and you're at that point in your healing process where you're like, oh, they don't really have that control over me, and I can tell my story, I can speak the truth, and I don't have to be afraid anymore. I just was very open with anybody and everyone around me, but I love the idea of giving a more public platform for somebody to really take back their power and take back that ability and claim their freedom that is owed to them, to be able to just speak the truth and tell their story. And that's really where I'm at with doing the Cultimatum podcast with Andrew. Is Andrew has helped me, and we work as a team to provide that platform for survivors who are at that point in their healing journey. Now, I've reached out to some people who said, I'm just not at the point, I'm not comfortable with that yet. And I'm like, that's okay. If and when you change your mind and you're looking for that platform and you're ready to tell your story, we're here to provide that for you. So if you change your mind, or you're in a better place and you feel like you are ready to do that, you just reach out, and we'll be there when you're ready. And if you're ready, I mean, some people may never be comfortable with that, because some people just aren't comfortable speaking out publicly. But for me, I feel like, for me personally, I tell my story now with a badge of honor, and really thinking that if sharing my crazy experience can help even one person, either that is in the process of maybe joining a group that has some red flags and they're questioning it, to back away and look at it more critically, or for somebody who's thinking about getting out and maybe, sneaking listening to some of these podcasts and these people that have been in the experience, have been in these groups, to say, oh gosh, I think there's a lot more going on underneath than what it looks like on the surface. And if they end up deciding they're going to leave or not join, that would be my main goal. If I can help one person to either leave or not join, then I feel like my story has done the job that I wanted it to do. It's had the effect I wanted it to have in the world. And that's the mark I want to leave, is that I maybe helped one person not join or get out of a cult. And or even just giving somebody that platform.
And it's inspiring for other people to see like someone do it with the badge of honor.
Yes.
And not feeling the shame or or feeling stupid or anything like that. It's very difficult to speak out about your story. And so it really helps other survivors to show that, like, not only can I speak out, but I can make a platform.
Some people even they're too embarrassed to tell their story. But I feel like, I think if they hear more people doing it and saying, yeah, I was tricked or I was deceived into believing this was the truth. And I don't feel like that's anything to be ashamed of. I feel like there are a lot of us out there that do end up falling into these traps. And Andrew says it all the time on the Cultimatum podcast. Nobody wakes up and says, "Oh, I'm going to join a cult today." We don't join cults. No. We join religious organizations. We join self-help groups. We join, multi-level marketing groups, or there are a multitude of things we think we're joining, but you don't think you're joining a cult when you join a cult. And you don't know it's a cult, and usually until you're out of it. No, you don't realize that's what it was until hindsight, when you've been able to process and deconstruct it.
It's very difficult to adjust to society after a cult as it is, let alone like telling people that you've been in a cult. There's a challenge there with, adjusting and also carrying that kind of story and that kind of information with you in your adjustment.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing to where that's really personal and individual too. And maybe speaking out isn't for everyone, or telling your story isn't for everyone. My now husband, for example, when I met him, I told him all about this all on our first date. And my sister set me up with him. And she was in the cult too. And he's like, wow, this is fascinating. He was really interested because I was like, this is going to scare this guy off. Let's just let him go now. Because, there's no reason to waste 6 weeks and then tell him, right? So first date, I'm like, just putting it all out there.
How it is.
And then he
I
was
do
just
the same
like,
thing.
do you? I'm just like, I was putting this out here. I don't want to waste anybody's time, yours or mine. And then he's like, I've known your sister for over a year and I've never heard any of this. And I'm like, yeah, she doesn't like to talk about it. Yeah. And, and obviously she was a coworker with him. She wasn't thinking about dating him in a romantic way, where I'm like, well, we're on a date and that could get serious. And I just feel like you should know this. So I'm just throwing it out there right away. Because I think that does, it does take an amount of patience to be with somebody who's been in that position, especially since when I met my husband, I was only a little over a year out. And I was like still in the process of deconstructing. Wow. So, I hadn't done a lot of healing, and I was like, this is going to come with some baggage. I'm just letting you know, if you want to stay with me, it's going to be a rough road.
Cult survivors have a very unique recovery.
We do. And like I said, it doesn't look the same for everyone. It's, it's a lot like grieving. You gotta work your own steps and do it in your own time. And certainly part of mine has been creating the platforms and creating the Occult Escape and Recovery group on Facebook has been a big part of it too. And that certainly is something I'm really proud of. And I feel like that is, there as a resource for people, and even just a way where we can connect and share our stories and ask the questions that we might not be able to comfortable asking somebody else. And between that and the Cultimatum podcast, those are the two things that I think have helped me the most with my healing. And obviously Cultimatum is pretty fresh and new. We only started this spring. I think our first episode dropped at the end of April. So we're working towards that, and we have high hopes. We have high hopes that it's going to be successful. And so far it's done really well.
And do you want to tell the audience about where they can find Cultimatum Podcast?
Yes, Cultimatum Podcast can be found. We actually have a Facebook group called Cultimatum Podcast, and you can also find us on Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook, and of course those are the groups where you can find us. But where you can listen to the podcast is on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. It's available on YouTube now too. And really pretty much just about anywhere you can find or listen to podcasts, iHeartRadio, iTunes, all of those as well.
Yep. And Cultimatum covers really cult awareness and human trafficking awareness.
Both.
So
exactly. Yes.
Definitely.
Very true. Yes.
Really good. I know my friends who listened, because also, if you guys are curious about my story, we did a part 1 and part 2 episode on Cultimatum as well.
Yes.
And I was going to say, my friends who watched my story on Cultimatum went through and watched all your guys' episodes, and they loved it.
So. That's awesome. Yeah, we love that.
Yep.
We love that.
It is very interesting because you guys bring a really diverse variety of different people from all kinds of different groups, all kinds of different information.
Yes, we do. We've had a lot of different cults, and we've got a couple of new ones coming up too that we had never heard of before. So it's a couple of other new ones coming out. So, and I wish you all the best with your podcast as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I agree with you too. I think it's been very healing. I think the projects around cult recovery and cult awareness have been some of the most healing things I've ever done concerning it,
Yep.
Really just taking your power and going out into the world and telling your story in a way that's going to help other people, It makes it really gives it yourself like a sense of purpose with the situation too.
Absolutely. And it makes you feel like, well, I didn't go through this for no reason. If I went through this, I hope somebody can learn something from it before they get as damaged or as hurt as I did from my experience. And that's the best I can hope for the people that may be listening, that may be in that situation. And I think that, anybody who's listening, who's, thinking about sharing their story and thinking they're ready for that, reach out to Ari to be a guest on her show. Reach out to Cultimatum if you want to be a guest on our show. I mean, anybody who comes on and wants to share their story again, I'll send them your way. I'll be like, oh, you want to share your story on another podcast? I know another one that's interviewing cult members. I'll send them your way. Because some people just want to keep sharing. And I'm like, great, go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm all ears. I love hearing everyone's stories, the things they've been through, and how they overcome these challenges, and how they get through their recovery. The recovery is so crazy.
Oh, it is.
It's such an important aspect of things.
I think it's lifelong too. I think even when I think I'm fully recovered, there are things that I still will get triggered. I mean, some of the interviews, as much as I love doing what I do, some of the interviews can be triggering. And I've had, nights where I couldn't sleep because it literally put me back in the mindset, and I would dream all night that I was back in my cult and I was trapped and I can't get out. And I wake up and I'm exhausted mentally and emotionally. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, thank God that was a dream. That wasn't real, because it's traumatizing. Even just believing that in a dream is traumatic.
Yeah. And it's true. It's something I go through the same things. I make lots of progress with it, and then something comes up and you're like triggered.
Yes.
And something new comes up and you're like, okay, some more stuff to work through. But
yep.
That's why it's good to take breaks, I think,
Oh,
in this
for
line
sure.
of work.
True.
Mental,
It's true.
emotional, just refresh so you don't get,
Burnt out. Yeah.
into a bad mindset or,
Yeah. Yeah.
looking at the bigger picture of why you're doing what you're doing.
For
So,
sure.
yeah, is there anything else that you want to add about the House of Yahweh or your experiences, anything?
I guess I will just say if anybody that is out there that is maybe still in the House of Yahweh that might just happen to be listening and having doubts or questions, that if you want to reach out to me on Facebook and ask questions about my personal experience or, what I know about the group, I'm more than happy to share that with people. Or if you know somebody, I have a family member that's in, I can answer your questions. They may not be the answers you want to hear, but I can answer them to the best of my ability. And as far as the podcast goes, if you are interested in sharing your story, once again, Ari's got her podcast here where you can share your story, but we also have Cultimatum where if you'd like to share your story, we'd like to hear it too. So if you're in that part of your healing journey, reach out to us for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. You have a really interesting story.
Well,
and some
thank
good
you. I
insight.
appreciate being here.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much, Melody. And thank you all for watching the DisAllusioned Podcast. We will see you next time.